Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host, and today we're going to be talking about why words matter. And it's important, as we're going to discuss. The words we use inform our beliefs inform our actions have consequences. And I want to discuss this in a particular context today. But before we get there, what I want to do is thank everybody who's joining me today. And you can go into the live chat on YouTube or in the comments in LinkedIn or Facebook. And if you've got something that you'd like to say, you agree with me, you disagree with me, you have a question, something, just go put it in the comments. I'll get it up on screen, and I will respond to it, do my best to respond to it. And if I don't get to it during the episode, I'll make sure I do it in the comments after the episode is over. And the other thing is to thank every single one of the members of the Chocolate Life. Their support makes this happen. You can go and become a member of the Chocolate Life. It's really, really simple. And this is the homepage of the Chocolate Life right now. Now, it may not be obvious to you, but this is a new browser. I'm using a new browser for the first time, and I'm just getting used to it. So we'll figure it out. And last week, I changed my monitor configuration. So I'm dealing with a lot of change here. So I appreciate your patience. But if you are not currently a member, you can go and click on the join button up here, and you can become a member. There's always a free membership tier, but if you do have the resources to support the work that I'm doing, your financial support is always greatly appreciated. And before we get into today's episode, do all the things like subscribe, share this with friends, put a comment. All of those things will help the visibility of this channel. And let's move on. For every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, I put together a post, and this is the post for today's episode. And I just want to point out that for many, many episodes, what I'll do is I will grab the image from a service called Unsplash. But this particular image is one that I took in April or May of 2006. I was on a trip to Venezuela with Sean Eskenazi. And after we got done interviewing the parents of these children, we walked out onto the street, and kids will be kids everywhere in the world. They came and they saw that I had a camera, and they were mugging for the camera. So, but this for me sort of exemplifies the notion of who is your neighbor and why does that matter? So this is a sort of a run of show. So these episodes are not scripted. Quick highlight is this coming Sunday, the 28th. So this coming Sunday is a holiday. It's Father's Day in the United States. And today is June 19th. So it's Juneteenth here in the United States. So I pushed off the members AMA from Father's Day to the next weekend. Right. I want to start off by asking what might be a very, very simple question, which is, what do you mean when you say sustainable or sustainability? When you say my chocolate company is sustainable, what does that mean? Or we have sustainability efforts. What does that mean? And this really came home to me. Again, I'm not going to read this verbatim, although I may read parts of it as I go on. This question really came home to me in 2018. So I was an invited guest by Barry Callebaut to go to visit ISM, one of the largest confectionery industry trade shows in Europe. It's in Cologne in Germany. And I was asked to be a guest. I had recently been in Shanghai for the Ruby launch. They asked me to Cologne to take part in the launch of a new book and a new tasting series or a new approach to tasting called Hidden Persuaders in Cocoa and Chocolate. Not going to talk about that right now, but there were presentations around it. And when I wasn't around presentations on their stand, I was walking around all around the expo center, and I participated in a number of conference sessions. And one of those conference sessions was something like sustainability in the cocoa sector. It was moderated by a sustainability expert. And there was a panel of people who were involved in cocoa sustainability. And over the course of roughly an hour or so, I formed two impressions that I took away from this and spent a lot of time thinking about. And the number one is that it became obvious to me that there was a sustainability industry. There are people whose job it is, and many people whose job it is to talk about sustainability, consult on the notions of sustainability, and there appears to be a vocabulary and a vocabulary that is very sophisticated. And if you're not part of this group, it can be opaque. There are common ideas that they hold in common, and they have developed shorthand for how they talk about them. And if you're not a part of that group, you can listen to their conversations and you have no idea what it is that's going on, right? Which is a real challenge, as you might imagine, right? And the other thing is that over the course of an hour, I heard sustainability, and there was no concrete definition in the program or by the moderator or by any of the people who were speaking to define, when I use the word sustainable or when I use the word sustainability, this is what I mean. And it's quite possible, because I'm not a member of the sustainability industry, that they were sharing, they're working from some shared idea about what it meant that I just didn't have any access to. But it was really, I walked away from here and goes, this is a problem for me, right? But after it was all over, I stood up and I asked the moderator, this was during Q&A, it's like, what do you mean when you use the word sustainable? Because it's not at all clear to me after listening to this for 40 minutes or however long it was. And I didn't get what I thought was a good answer. And so since then, I've been actively working to create a workable definition for sustainable that is easier to explain. That's easier to understand to the average chocolate fan than the 17 US sustainability goals. And it's glitching. I'm not entirely sure why. This is a new browser. I'm hoping the new browser would fix it. It's one of the reasons why it changed. It was a Chrome fork. It's now a Firefox fork. There's something else going on. Obviously, not entirely sure what it is. But in any event, I apologize. It's a technical thing. I don't know what I'm going to do about it. So at that time, I was not writing as the technical editor of International Confectionery magazine. And this quote that's up here, right, came from my first ever article as the technical editor of International Confectionery magazine. It was the July 2021 issue, where I recounted this, and it was a part of my experience at ISM. And what I've done is, if you'd like to read the entire article, you can click on the download arrow, and it's a PDF, and you'll be able to read my entire article that I talked about. So there were 3 interviews in that article, at least. But I wanted to point out that one of the things that I did talk about was some research that had been done by a group called the Conference Board. And I go into it in a little more detail in the article. But one of the things that the Conference Board research said is that there are fundamental, among consumers anyway, there are fundamentally different ways that consumers tend to think about sustainability, and they are cultural, right? So for example, in Europe, there is a tendency, if somebody says this is sustainable, that what they're talking about is they're talking about social justice issues. So things that are going to lead to more equity in the supply chain, for example. So fair trade, things like that, when people think about sustainable. And in the United States, when we hear the word sustainable, what we tend to do is tend to think about concepts around recycling and composting and things like that. Something is sustainable if it doesn't generate a waste stream that goes into a dump, right? And there are places where there are combinations of these things, but they tend to be cultural. And from a communications perspective, if we're going to be talking about sustainable or sustainability, that there is no one-size-fits-all definition. You need to understand what your audience, right, presupposes already about what sustainability means, right? And if you don't talk to them using the language that they're expecting, you're talking past them, not to them. You think you're having a conversation with them, but you're not. Part of the challenge for me, right, is that the way that sustainability is defined in the industry as part of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And this is a link to the UN website. If you click on it, it'll launch, right, a window or a tab. And what you'll do is you'll find that there are 17 sustainability goals, right? They are what they call 169 targets. We'll get into what targets mean, right? And all of these things are, to the right, events and publications and actions. They're just designed to be sort of progress indicators. But the 17 SDGs are no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy. I'm not going to go through all of them, but there are 17, and you can go and you can go and read them for yourself. The links are here. But what I do want to do is I want to go and sort of deconstruct one aspect of the SDGs, which is there, you see here, I don't know if you can read it, the number 12. It says there are 12 targets. So let's go figure out what they mean by targets, right? So goal number 8 is promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable. And this is a problem for me. So we're talking about sustainability, and these are the Sustainable Development Goals. And we're using sustained and sustainable, right, in a different sense, right? So sustainable over the long term. So there's some equivocation going on here that we need to be aware of. But I just wanted to go and, this is what it is. So goal number 8 has to do with economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. So these are decent jobs. It's important to understand. So we have an overview, and so we can go take a look at what the overview is. And they're talking a little bit about progress. 138 million children in child labor in 2024. That's 100 million fewer than in 2000. It's 100 plus million fewer. 20 plus million fewer than 2020. So they're giving you an indicator of what's going on. But let's go take a look up here where it says targets and indicators. Oops, excuse me. Let's go look at targets and indicators. Right. So within UN SDG 8, there were 12 targets. Right. So target number 1, 8.1, is sustain per capita economic growth in accordance with national circumstances, and in particular, at least 7% gross GDP product growth per year in the least developed countries. So, okay, right? So at some point, right, we'll find somewhere in some report whether or not they've actually achieved these goals, but it's not here. An indicator here is an annual growth rate of real GDP per capita, right? So I'm kind of interested in, why the 7% figure didn't make it down here, because that's a stated goal, right? But each one of these targets, 8.2, achieve higher levels of economic productivity through diversification, but without a goal, just higher levels of productivity. Right? How are they going to do that? Through diversification, technological upgrading and innovation, including through a focus on high value added and labor intensive sectors. Right? So the indicators are annual growth rate of real GDP per employed person, thinking that productivity automatically leads to an increase in GDP. So what I want you to get the sense here is that there may be 17 UN SDGs, but when you think about it, there are, let me just do this because it's going to be the quickest way to get there. There are 17, so there are 7 plus 8 is 15, plus 13 is 28, plus 10 is 30. You get 47. there are lots of sub goals associated with this. And one of the things that companies can do is they can say, well, when we talk about sustainability, what we're going to do is we're talking about meeting UN SDGs, X, Y, and Z. They're not talking about meeting all 17 SDGs. They're talking about meeting some of them. And that's a challenge because they get to cherry pick what is of interest to them. And it turns out that, well, we may not care about peace, justice, and strong institutions or gender equality. Well, okay, right? You can still be sustainable even if you don't want to work on those goals. So it's complicated to understand, right? That's one of the points that I want to make here. Not only are there 17 SDGs, companies don't have to commit to working towards all 17 of these goals, right? And within each one of these goals, there are a bunch of sub goals that need to be looked at. It's really, really complicated. And trying to explain sustainability against this backdrop is really, really challenging. All right. So, and you can go take a look at all of these if you want to go look at them. That's why the link is there. I also want to talk about a group called the Brundtland Commission. The Brundtland Commission is another UN effort. So here's the link to the UN page on sustainability, where they talk about the Brundtland Commission. So they say, in 1987, the UN Brundtland Commission defined sustainability. So to some extent, right, the UN SDGs build upon this definition from the Brundtland Commission. And what the Brundtland Commission's define sustainability as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generation to meet their own needs. So I hope what they're saying here is clear. Meet the needs of the present. So when we talk about sustainable or sustainability, what we're talking about, for example, in the context of cocoa, so we can meet the needs of the present, so we can deliver enough cocoa, right? Because they're talking about development without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So whatever it is that we do this year, we cannot engage in any activities that's going to make it harder for the next generation of cocoa farmers, to be able to earn a living, right? And this is all in the context of the sustainability goals, right? Sustainable development goals, which form the framework for improving the lives of populations around the world and mitigating the hazardous man-made effects of climate change. And so I think this is a lot more. They went from a relatively simple definition here, meeting future needs, right? With meeting the needs of the present without compromising the needs of the future, into something which is much more complicated, right? Making it much more difficult to communicate, right, what we're talking about. When people ask, what do you mean when you use the word sustainable? Are we talking about equity to farmers? Are we talking about the environment? What are we talking about? Or are we talking about recycling? I mean, this is a huge challenge. And I wanted to point out that there were lots of people involved, right, in going from the simple definition to the much more complex definition. So in the context of the chocolate life, what I want to do is I want to talk about what I've come up with as a way to talk about sustainability, right? And one of the most important things about this, I haven't done it on this page, but I have done this exercise, is to map all 17 UN SDGs into these 4 buckets. So all of the 17 fit into these 4 buckets. Some of the SDGs fit into 2 or more. Some of them only fit into 1 bucket. But let's talk about when I talk about sustainability, this is what I mean. So at a fundamental level, we have environmental sustainability, which means that the farm, the trees, and their supporting ecosystems and their dependent ecosystems, right, are managed in a way that they're healthy and thriving 100 years from now. So that's a restatement of the Brundtland definition, meeting the needs of the present without compromising the needs of the future. But I think it's stated in a slightly more concrete way. That when we're talking about cocoa, it's the farms, the trees, the land, right? They are managed, stewardship, if you prefer, if you like. They're managed in a way, and the supporting ecosystems and the dependent ecosystems, right, are managed in a way that they're healthy and thriving, right, for 100 years from now, 100 years from now. So what this might say, for example, is if I have a large-scale centralized cocoa fermentation facility, what I don't want to let happen is I don't want to let the liquid that runs off during fermentation, which is highly acidic, right, and might have a fair amount of sugar in it, you don't want it to run across the landscape, right? It will, the acidity will harm the roots and vegetation, right? But if it gets into a local waterway, it can harm fish and other aquatic mammals, right? So that's what I mean by dependent ecosystems. Supporting ecosystems are going to be, for example, pollinators, right? You want to manage things so you have pollinators. They're a supporting ecosystem. So I hope you get the notion here that that's what we're talking about. That's what I mean when I talk about environmental sustainability, right? Economic sustainability means that there's enough money is going to the farmer to be able to support their family, right? And be able to meet all of the environmental sustainability goals, right? Because we need farming families 100 years from now. So we need to create systems that make sure that the farmers are adequately paid so they can take care of their families, right? They can provide the education, right? Access to healthcare, all of the things that we would like to think are associated with leading a dignified life. There might be some upward mobility. I can send my kids to college. All of the things that we think of are important, right? Respecting the fact that they may have different priorities. This is also very, very important, right? But there's also enough money, right? So this is why the order is the way it is, right? There's also enough money to take care of the environmental sustainability aspects that we've been discussing, right? Because if you're not paying the farmers enough, they're not going to be able to take care of their land. The trees aren't as healthy, and you get a downward spiral because the trees are not producing as much. They're much less resistant to diseases and things like that. It's not just about paying a living wage, right? So do I have enough money to put food on my table? That's a part of it. But there needs to be enough money to be able to take care of the environmental concerns properly. The third aspect of this for me is social sustainability. Farming families live in communities, right? And there need to be the resources to ensure that the communities are healthy and thriving 100 years from now. And how that is done, so it could be there are going to be schools that are built. There are going to be local clinics that are being built. There's, if you had to if you had to walk a number of miles for drinking water, that maybe you have a shared well. What you want to do is you want to make sure that there's social cohesion, right? That the literally their neighbors, people who live nearby, right? But social sustainability is all about the community that the farming families live in. And they need to have the resources to make sure that they are healthy and thriving 100 years from now, right? So that the farmers, when they have the income, have a support infrastructure so that they can take care of their families, and also that there's enough money to take care of the environmental, right, goals that we want to work towards, right? What's interesting about this, and what's interesting about most of the SDGs, is the framework that these things are all at the farm level, right? They're all in a producing country. and they're all at the farm level. So for the most part, sustainability is framed as a problem, right? That's somewhere else, right? It's not framed as a problem that's in my backyard, right? And where the definition that I use is different from any other definitions is the addition of this fourth category, which is market sustainability. There need to be customers who are willing to pay what it takes to achieve the social, economic, and environmental sustainability goals. If you do not have people who are willing to pay what it takes, you can talk all you want about environmental sustainability, about economic sustainability, so it doesn't matter, right? You need to have people who are willing to pay what it takes, right? And so and almost always, these are companies that exist outside a producing country, right? There are actors. I mean, when I say, so for example, Barry Callebaut, Olam, Ofi, these are companies that have huge presences in cocoa producing countries, but they're not headquartered in cocoa producing countries. They do have facilities in cocoa producing countries, but they're not headquartered in cocoa producing countries. And so they're providing the external markets for what's going on. Are those markets, quote unquote, sustainable? Well, the answer to that question is, if we take a look at where are we in terms of implementing all of the sustainable development goals? Well, have we alleviated poverty? No, we haven't alleviated poverty. Have we alleviated hunger? No. Is everybody healthy and well-being? No. Right? Is every child receiving a quality education? No. Gender equality is interesting. It not all cultures, right, have the same relationship between the heads of the male and female heads of households, right? And if I'm using gender, right, improperly there, I apologize. This is stream of mind. But you get, does everybody have access to clean water and sanitation? No. Affordable and clean energy? No. So in terms of this, the markets are not providing the resources necessary to be able to meet the development goals, right? But they are as important, if not more important, than any other aspect of this, in my opinion, right? So if we go take a look at this, so we talk about environmental sustainability. So let's go take a look at some of these. Environmental sustainability is going to include things like climate action, life below water, life on land. So all of those three fit within, right, my environmental sustainability category. Affordable and clean energy fits some. You get the reduced inequalities. We can fit these things. Again, sustainable cities. Well, so this is about social construct, but I don't know about you, but using the word sustainable in a definition of sustainable is a challenge, right? Responsible consumption and production. We can fit all of these things within my four categories. And I think my four categories, right, which build on top of Brundtland, right, are a simpler way of thinking about sustainability that people get and understand. But what do you think? Do you think that do you understand? Do you believe that the Brundtland Commission definition is sufficient? What are your thoughts about 17 SDGs with on average at least 8? So 125, 130 sub goals. The complexity of it, do you think my approach makes more sense in terms of thinking about what sustainability is, right? What's also important is, I have mentioned this already, one of the above four things, so one of these, environmental, economic, social, and market sustainability, is not like the others, right? And that is the fact that the first three, environmental, economic, and social sustainability, are all happening in the producing country, right? Whereas market sustainability is happening outside the producing country in what I think of as a consuming country. So I'm a pro-cocoa producing country. I grow cocoa. I'm a cocoa consuming country. I don't grow cocoa, right? I buy cocoa and I will transform it. So that's another, I think, an important consideration to think about. But what do you think about sustainability? Is there a simpler definition? Even the one that I am using, where do you fit on this? When you think about sustainability, do you think about social justice and equity issues like fair trade, or are you thinking about recycling, right? Compostability, circular economies, right? Which tend to be the way many consumers think about sustainability. And again, what's really important, if we're using the same word in different ways, when we have these conversations, we're talking past each other. Right? We think we're saying the same things, and we're not saying the same thing. So it's really important to understand why the words we use matter. So having gone through that, I want to go back to the original concept, which is, who's your neighbor? And I made a post on LinkedIn. I think I'm logged in. I am. This is my account. So I wrote a post on LinkedIn earlier this week, but for some reason, I'm not going directly to that post. Oh, interesting. Anyway, so I will fix this link. I'm not going to do it live because it'll take me a couple of seconds to figure it out. But this question of who's your neighbor becomes really important, because if you think that your neighbor is someone who looks like you, who's someone who sounds like you, who is someone who believes the same thing that you believe, if that's how you define what your neighbor is, then it's really easy to other people who do not look like you, right? Other people who do not sound like you, other people who do not believe the same things that you believe. And when you other people, it makes it easier to dismiss them, right? It makes it easier to, unfortunately, dehumanize them, right? And you're going to say, oh, there's an implicit, we are better than they are, right? And now we get in discussions of why are we helping them, right? And part of that is also some colonial language that we borrow. And as a matter of fact, if you go look through the UN resources that I point to, they also use this language. So when you say the farmers are in the global south, right, you're making an implicit judgment, right? You may not be aware of it, but when you say we here are in the global north and those people are in the global south, there is a value judgment. North is above, north is higher than south, which is below you. And it may sound crazy, right? But it turns out that there is an unexamined bias in using the phrase global north versus global south, right? And because on most maps, right, the United States and Europe is above, right, the line to Tropic of Cancer to the Tropic of Capricorn, we're better than they are, right? You may not understand that this is what you're saying, right? This is what you mean when you're saying those things, but it is the unexamined word choice. Words inform your belief, beliefs inform your actions, actions have consequences. So when you say global north versus global south, right, it will have an influence on the decisions that you make and the actions that follow and the consequences of those decisions and actions. Another version of that is when you say, oh, I live in a first world country and those people live in third world countries, right? And this is where the bias becomes fairly obvious. First versus third. What's the second world? I'm not sure, but there is a distancing. When I say, well, the United States is a first world country and Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire are third world country, there is an explicit value judgment there that says, I'm better than they are. And what you had just have done is you have othered the people in the third world countries. You've distanced them. You've compared them with you. And it makes it easier to take them less seriously, right? And to take yourself perhaps too seriously, right? And one of the ways that this plays out, unfortunately, in the world of small chocolate making is the number of people who know nothing about the science of fermentation. I mean, they've never taken a course on fermentation. All they know is what they've read about fermentation, and it takes somewhere between 3 days and 7 days, and you have to turn it every day. This is their knowledge about fermentation, right? And they have the hubris to think that they're going to teach cocoa farmers how to ferment, quote unquote, properly, right? Where the cocoa farmer, they may be a third or fourth or a fifth or a sixth generation farmer, and they're able to turn out a fabulous product, right? They don't need some overprivileged or someone who thinks that they're privileged and thinks that they know more than they do when they have no experience going in and telling the farmers what they should do. And this is an example of what happens when you adopt the language of what turns out to be economic imperialism or social imperialism, right? That I live in a first world country, you live in a third world country, I know more than you. I'm going to come in and I'm going to tell you what to do, right? I hope you see the issue without examining what that language implies. Now, the third aspect of this, and this is the word that shows up in the UN documents, right? Which is, I live in a developed country, you live in a developing country. But because I'm developed and you're developing, you need my help. Right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you the nature of the help I'm prepared to give you on whatever terms. And this is one of the issues with fair trade, right? Quote unquote, because it's who decides what's fair. So it is a bunch of people in the global north, right? Mainly white people, but it's a bunch of white people in the global north telling mostly brown people and black people in the global south what's fair, right? And we want you, people in the global south or developing third world countries, to adopt some moral or ethical standards which we've come to, right? And we're going to ask you to pay for the privilege of doing this. This is the certification. So we're going to ask you to pay for the privilege of adopting, right, our ideas, right? But we're not going to guarantee to de-risk everything. So if you're a fair trade certified co-op, Rainforest, fair trade, let's stay in there. But if you're a fair trade certified co-op, fair trade doesn't guarantee to purchase all of the cocoa at the fair trade price, right? That is grown by the co-op. It doesn't. It charges the certification fees, and then the co-op is left to its own devices to try to recoup the cost of certification by selling all of the cocoa at the certified price, which is extremely rare. On average, according to the International Institute for Sustainable Development, only about something less than 50% of all the cocoa that on which a certification fee is paid actually earns the premiums which are associated with certifications, right? If the co-op, and it's always co-ops, not individual farmers can't afford certifications, but if the co-ops are unable to earn the premium for their cocoa, they will sell it as conventional cocoa, and they have to pay for the certification out of their own pocket, or if they're lucky, they have some NGO who's paying the certification fees for them. But this sounds like, does it sound fair? Right? We're really, really sorry that we exploited you for centuries, and now we have this idea about how we now have adopted this new sense of morals and ethics. We're not going to exploit you anymore, but we're going to impose upon you a regimen, and we're going to make you pay for it, but we're not going to take the risk associated with it. I hope you can understand that this is not fair, right? Because it is the people who live in the global north, first world, and developed countries, right, who are determining what's fair for people that they think live in the global south and developing third world countries, right? And there is a fundamental structural power imbalance there. And as I say this thing, it seems to make sense that I'm doing this on Juneteenth, right? There's a fundamental structural power imbalance there. And when you have this fundamental structural power imbalances, and are fundamental and structural synonyms in that context, not entirely sure. But if you have this power imbalance and one side is benefiting from it at the expense of the other, it is fundamentally unfair, right? And the way the whole negotiation process works is if big chocolate is in the room when the fair trade premium is put together, then it's not, they're putting their thumbs on the scale, right? Because they want to make sure that that premium is as small as possible. They want to pay as little as possible. So I hope you understand what I see as the issues for using these words. I want to encourage you to stop saying global north and global south. I want to encourage you to stop saying I live in a first world country, they live in a third world country. I want to encourage you to stop saying, well, I lived in a developed country and they live in a developing country. I want you to think about, right, a neutral, as in by neutral, I mean no judgment, right, alternative. And the one that I have settled on, have been using for the last couple of years, right, is I live in a consuming country. I don't grow cocoa here, right? We don't grow much cocoa here in the United States. We do in Hawaii, and so I could make in my mind, yeah, Hawaii is a producing state, but there's not, well, and Puerto Rico, they produce cocoa there, right? And so they're a territory. But for the most part, the United States is not a cocoa producing country, right? Certainly not in Arizona. There's no cocoa growing in Arizona, which is where I am at the moment, right? So I am in a consuming country. Cocoa grows. If you live in a country where cocoa grows, you live in a producing country, right? And there's no, I don't think there's an implied judgment associated with using consuming and producing. They're just statements of, does cocoa grow here or does cocoa not grow here? Now, it turns out that you can be in a country like Peru where there is a lot of production and a lot of transformation, but you're still in that a producing country, right? Because that's where the cocoa comes from. And that's fundamentally different from any place in the European Union. There aren't any countries in the EU, Switzerland not, Belgium not, Amsterdam not, except maybe in a greenhouse, a couple of trees here and there. They're not producing countries. They are consuming countries. And I think it's really, really important that we think about that kind of language, right? And think about what it means when we think about sustainable. Because I can apply my definitions for sustainability to me, right? I want to make sure that I live in a place where, right, the farms, there are farms around me here in Arizona, and the supporting and the dependent ecosystems are, right, managed in a way so that they'll be healthy and thriving 100 years from now, right? I want to make sure that the people who grow the food I eat, right, are taken care of. They can take care of their families and that they have the money to do the environmental work, right? These sustainability questions, right, or the framing that I put them in, don't make this developed, right, developing or first, third, or north, south kind of distinction. Market sustainability, I go to the Prescott Farmers Market on a regular basis, and I know, right, that there are people who are willing to pay what it takes to reward the farmers who are doing the work. I can see it in action. And that's really, really important. It's easier when the farmer is 1,000 kilometers away, 2,000 kilometers away, 5,000 kilometers away, and you never see them. It's easier to other them and use these words that distance you and put you, right, on a higher plane, or think that you put you on a higher plane, right? And so finally, for this episode, I want to bring it back well, I don't want to bring it back. I'm bringing it for the first time, right? Is I want to think about how this works within the world of craft chocolate, right? And here's an interesting question to all of you who might be watching this, whether you're live or at some other point. When you use the word craft, what do you mean? What does craft chocolate mean? And how is craft different from artisan? So craft chocolate, artisan chocolate, and how is that different, if it is, from fine chocolate? How are we using those words, and are there meaningful differentiations between the three of them, right? Then there's this question of what does bean to bar mean? So this term is now 30 years old this year. It was, I believe, coined in 1996 by John Scharfenberger and Robert Steinberg. Might have been in 1997. I don't have a precise date on the time when it was introduced, right? But what does bean to bar mean? Now, when John and Robert created the term, what they were doing is they were comparing what they were doing with big industrial chocolate makers, right? That somehow bean to bar, in their mind, implied artisan, right? Which meant that it wasn't being done industrially. But they really didn't define industrially. They just said bean to bar means we're the antithesis of what big industrial chocolate makers are. Right? Unfortunately, right, the term bean to bar is just a descriptive, right? And it has been co-opted by Big Chocolate for any company that begins with beans and ends with bars and sells bars, which means that Ghirardelli, which is owned by Lindt and Sprungli, right, can put on the front of their boxes, right, proudly bean to bar, our commitment to ultimate quality. And when a big industrial chocolate maker can use a term that, the quote unquote craft chocolate industry has been using for 30 years, does bean to bar bring a differentiation that is meaningful? And the answer to that question is complicated. Maybe it's meaningful. I'm not entirely sure. But it's not as strong as it should be. And the reason why is that there is no consensus definition of what bean to bar actually means. So if I'm a consumer, I can go to 10 different chocolate makers and there will be 11 different definitions for what bean to bar means, right? And that's very, very confusing. And if we as an industry, we are confused, it's no wonder that consumers are confused. And then how is bean to bar different from craft and artisan and fine, right? Am I a craft bean to bar maker, an artisan bean to bar maker? Am I a fine bean to bar maker, right? How do these relate to each other? So as you might imagine, this is something I've been thinking about for quite some time. And what I want to do is I want to suggest a meaningful differentiation between craft and industrial. You tell me if you agree with me, tell me if you disagree with me. This is the way I think of it, right? I don't think that there is a hard line, right? There's not black and white, right, between craft and industrial. It is a continuum with craft at one end and industrial at the other end. And the way I think about it is one of intent, right? So an industrial chocolate maker starts out with the end goal in mind. So it doesn't matter what the input is. So we know that cocoa beans from the same farm, year over year will result in chocolate that is slightly different, right? But if you're an industrial chocolate maker, one of the hallmarks of industrial products is repeatability and consistency. So as an industrial chocolate maker, your goal is to make sure the chocolate tastes the same, right? Or has the same technical properties. And the reason why you do that is because your customers demand it, right? If you're a big processor, Barry Callebaut, for example, Cargill, for example, and you're selling products that are being used by confectioners, and they're putting it in an enrobing machine, and they're doing 5,000 enrobed candy bars per hour, right? You need to make sure that the rheology, the flow characteristics, right, are the same batch to batch to batch to batch. And you do everything you can as a manufacturer, right, to ensure that consistency. And that is the hallmark of an industrial chocolate maker. I hope you can understand the simplicity of that notion, right, is that industrial chocolate maker starts out with the end goal in mind and does everything they can do to achieve that end goal, batch after batch after batch after batch after batch, right? A craft chocolate maker, on the other hand, the other end of the spectrum, a craft chocolate maker, right, looks at a new bag of beans and says, oh, this is a new creative opportunity. I know that the 2025 harvest is going to be from the 2024 harvest. I'm not going to try to make the 2020, I'm not going to force the 2025 chocolate to taste like the 2024 chocolate. I'm going to do everything I can do to maximize the expression of the potential that the beans present to me, right? And so it's a matter of intent. The craft chocolate maker says every bag, right, or every new batch, new harvest is a new creative opportunity. I'm going to try to maximize the expression of potential. An industrial chocolate maker says they don't care about that. They need to make sure that the chocolate tastes the same and works the same every single time. Now, it may be that you might have a big chocolate maker. Let's take Veltlin, for example, in Switzerland, right? That most of the product they make is industrial, right? But they do have their Grand Cru line. And the Grand Cru line is, for example, done on small Lehmann longitudinal conches, finish it off, right? And that's the opposite of, you know, running tons an hour through a 5-roll mill, which is what they use for all of their chocolate, right? But it turns out that when they run their Grand Cru products, right, they handle it differently, right? And say, let's go and run the conching on this, because what we want to do is we want to have a different bean expression, a different flavor expression from the beans, right? And if it turns out, if, you know, the 2006 change is a little bit different from the 2007, which happened with the Cru Sauvage, they made fundamental changes between the first production year and the second production year, and it's never tasted as good as the first production year. I'm really, really sad about that. I mean, I still remember that first harvest of Cru Sauvage, and it being like one of the most transcendental chocolate eating experiences I've ever had. And it's, what, 20 years later now, right? It's quite remarkable, right? So that's I think that's a good way of defining craft versus industrial. And so artisan is, in this particular case, it's not entirely synonymous with craft, right? But we could ask our question, is, having just said that the differentiation between craft and artisan or craft and industrial is what it is, an artisan product is one that is more hands-on, right? It's one where there's a lot more labor associated with it. And that would be a good way of thinking about the difference between craft and artisan, because I could be a craft chocolate maker and work in ball mills, right? And I could be an industrial chocolate maker, as I said, like Veltlin, and I'm going to take a portion of my production and run it through, Lehmann longitudinal batch conches, right? So it is a spectrum. And makers can have different aspects of their process that are at different parts of the spectrum, right? Different places in the spectrum, but there's a fundamental difference. Industrial makers start off with the end goal in mind. The craft maker says, ooh, here's an opportunity for creative expression. And I hope that differentiation is one that makes sense to you, and it's one that you buy into. Right? That when you start talking to people about industrial versus, it's not just scale. It's not just, so I don't want to define craft as, oh, you can only use equipment that processes less than 200 kilograms at a time. And you can't, if you want to be a craft chocolate maker, you can't make more than 5 tons a year. Those are arbitrary lines that don't make any sense to me, right? I think we have to root the differentiation in intent. And I hope you'll agree with me that the differentiation is intent, right? And so we can meaningfully compare craft, artisan, industrial, right? When we think about it this way, we can think about the amount of labor, right? So an artisan maker is going to do more hands-on labor, right? Maybe they're hand shelling or hand cracking, when they're winnowing their beans. Maybe there's manually, right, moving things from the sorting table into the roaster, into the cracker and winnower, into the melanger. It's all handwork. There's no materials automation. A craft maker might have equipment that automates much of that, right? But there's still this intent. Every bean is an opportunity for creative expression, right? That's the way I think about it, right? When I think about craft and industrial and artisan, right? But the question, so I would urge the industry generally to stop using the phrase bean to bar. You can say, I work from beans, I work from liquor. Those are, I think, I'm a from the bean chocolate maker, right? We have similar kinds of things. What does it mean to be farm to bar? What does it mean to be tree to bar? Is a company like Cho that sends their chocolate maker to a producing country where they oversee the roast and the grinding into liquor, and then they send the liquor back to the factory in Berkeley. Is that a bean to bar maker? We're having arguments over process, right? And again, I think that argument obscures the fundamental reality, which is that if we're confused, no wonder our consumers don't get the value proposition. We're not communicating with them consistently. Words matter. So what I've been doing is I want to suggest that there is in fact a better term than bean to bar, artisan, craft, fine, all of those things, right? And it is the term specialty. And we can start off, I'm not going to worry today about perfection, right? I want to have a starting working definition that we can agree to, saying that over time, right, we're going to have a more formal definition, right? But a specialty chocolate is any chocolate that is made from a specialty cocoa bean. And a specialty cocoa bean is one that has been determined, right, to make good tasting chocolate. This parallels exactly the way the Specialty Coffee Association frames specialty coffee. A specialty coffee beverage is any specialty coffee beverage that is made with a specialty coffee bean, and a specialty coffee bean is one that has received a certain score by professional graders, right? And if the professional grader says through cupping, right, proper roasting and cupping, that this bean can be used to make good coffee, it's a specialty coffee bean, right? It's really, really very simple, right? Now, we don't have an industry-wide system of grading cocoa beans, right? There are a number of competing approaches. My personal recommendation would be, and my personal approach, and this is what I'm leaning into, to at least start the discussion. It may not end there, but it will start the discussion, is to take a look at the work that's being done by the Cacao of Excellence. If the Cacao of Excellence determines that this bean is capable of making good tasting chocolate, then it is a specialty cocoa bean. And any chocolate made from it is a specialty chocolate. Now, the great thing about it is that they've been involved in this exercise since 2011, which is when the first Cocoa of Excellence program was put together. They have awarded hundreds, I think, of different producers as being specialty producers. When we look at, for example, the Heirloom Cacao Preservation Fund, they use the same rubric, right? Because the HCP, the process, the methodology for determining whether something is considered heirloom is built by the people who built the Cacao of Excellence program, and they use the same methodology, right? So there are ways to say, oh my gosh, we have already identified hundreds of cocoa producers that are producing specialty cocoa beans. And let's just start there, right? There are other things we might do. We might say, listen, if your bean has been used in a chocolate that has won gold awards in 2 or 3, pick a number, International Chocolate Awards, Academy Awards, it has to have won in both, for example. We can say, oh, right, then you're a specialty cocoa bean because it's been recognized by makers and by judges, even though there's not a formal organoleptic analysis which has been done on the beans, and we don't know the genetics of what's going on. But there are ways to go and take this number and make it quite large very, very quickly. And I want, so what do you, so, and, but the nice thing about it is that a lot of the educational effort that the Specialty Coffee Association has done around the word specialty to get people to understand what specialty means, right? Right? It doesn't have anything to do with genetics. Genetics are important. I go into a store and it will say Arabica. And we've been told that Arabica is better than Robusta. And when we think about chocolate, we know that Criollo is better than Forastero and Trinitario is somewhere in the middle. We do have these parallel structures, but it turns out that the thing about specialty is that all we care about is, does this cocoa bean make good chocolate, right? It doesn't care about genetics. It doesn't care about fermentation. It doesn't care if it's of a single estate or multiple states. Those are descriptors that we can add to a specialty cocoa bean, right? But they don't define specialty, right? And that's the way coffee has done. And I think there's real value in adopting the way specialty coffee thinks about their product, thinks about coffee beans and coffee beverages, and not go down the route that craft beer did, which is the definition for craft beer is now, well, you can't have more than, I think, 25% beneficial ownership by a company, by a quote unquote big beer company, and you can't make more than 60,000 barrels or something like that. And that's what the definition of craft is. If we go and we try to adopt that same thing, that same approach in for craft chocolate, I think, we failed ourselves, we failed the farmers, we failed our customers. And that's it. That's why words matter. Who's your neighbor, right? It's really important when we think about who our neighbor is. It does inform the way we think about sustainability and are responsible towards sustainable development. So I think it's really important that we understand that. But what do you think, right? Like, subscribe, right? Put something in the comments. Let me know. I will, in fact, respond to them. I try to respond to all the comments in time. I do my best to respond to all the comments in time. And let me know. And that's it for today. Friday, June 19th. I'll be back this coming Tuesday. Not entirely sure what the topic of this coming Tuesday's episode is going to be, but this episode of Pod Save Chocolate, like all episodes of Pod Save Chocolate, is sponsored by the members of the Chocolate Life. And I want to thank all of the members, free members, premium members, for their support of everything I've been doing since 2008. Yeah, 2008. It's 18 years this year. It's been a while. It's been a great ride, and I really do appreciate everybody who's been a part of it with me. And until I see you all again, I want everybody to have a great weekend. This coming Sunday is Father's Day here in the United States. So all the dads who might be watching this, I hope you have a great Father's Day. You and your families, not just you. Everyone has a great Father's Day, celebrates the day with their family. However, and until then, remember, everybody, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you just might be doing it wrong. Ciao until the next time.